On October 10, 2025, at exactly 12:01 a.m., Roy Lee Ward was strapped to a gurney in the Indiana State Prison. At 52 years old, he had spent nearly half his life waiting for this moment. 24 years on death row. 24 years since the night that changed everything. 24 years since a 15-year-old girl named Stacy Payne never came home. This is the story of one of America's most controversial recent executions. A story of tragedy, justice, and the final moments of a man who pleaded guilty but fought to stay alive for more than 2 decades. If you're interested in true crime cases like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future stories. July 11, 2001, in southern Indiana, in the small town of Dale. This was a quiet area where everyone knew their neighbors and violent crime was almost unheard of. Stacy Payne was just 15 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was a daughter, a friend, a teenager with dreams and plans for the future. She worked at Jenks Pizza, a local restaurant where she was scheduled to work that day. But on that terrible July afternoon, those dreams were violently taken away. Roy Lee Ward, then 29 years old, persuaded Stacy to let him into her home in Dale, Indiana. What happened next is deeply disturbing. Ward didn't just take a life. He destroyed a family. He shattered a community. And he set in motion a legal process that would span nearly a quarter century. The details of Stacy's murder are horrific. Ward raped the teenage girl and then attacked her with a dumbbell and a knife. The attack was so brutal that Stacy suffered 18 blunt force injuries. Her throat and abdomen were cut open. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was calculated, vicious violence against a child. Stacy was airlifted from Dale to a hospital, fighting for her life. But the injuries were too severe. Hours later, Stacy Payne died, and the community was left in shock and grief. The family's worst nightmare had come true. Stacy Payne's body bore witness to unimaginable violence, and the evidence pointed directly to Roy Lee Ward. The community of Dale was devastated. How could something like this happen in their small town? Parents held their children closer. The sense of safety that had defined this quiet corner of Indiana was shattered forever. Stacy's family would never be the same. Her mother would never see her graduate high school. Never see her get married. Never meet her grandchildren. All of those moments, stolen in one afternoon of unspeakable violence. For Stacy's loved ones, the question wasn't just who did this, it was why. Why Stacy? Why that day? But monsters rarely have answers that make sense to the rest of us. Roy Lee Ward was quickly identified as a suspect. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA, physical evidence, witness statements, everything pointed to one man. And when confronted with this mountain of evidence, Ward made a decision that would define the next 24 years of his life. He confessed. He admitted what he had done. And he would soon face the consequences. In 2002, Roy Lee Ward stood before a Spencer County jury and pleaded guilty to rape and murder. This wasn't a case where the defendant claimed innocence. Ward admitted his crimes. The question wasn't guilt or innocence. The question was punishment. Should a man who confesses to raping and murdering a 15-year-old girl receive the death penalty? The jury thought so. In 2002, they sentenced Roy Lee Ward to death. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. In capital punishment cases, everything must be done by the book. Every procedure, every legal requirement, every constitutional protection must be followed to the letter. Because when the state takes a life, there can be no room for error. The Indiana Supreme Court found problems with Ward's first sentencing. Not with his guilt, that was never in question. But with the legal process that led to his death sentence. So they did something that might seem shocking, they overturned his death sentence and ordered a new sentencing trial. Imagine being Stacy Payne's family. You've watched a jury sentence your daughter's killer to death. You think justice has been served. And then years later, you're told you have to go through it all again. You have to relive the nightmare. You have to sit through another trial. You have to listen to the details of what happened to your child one more time. That's exactly what happened. In 2007, 5 years after the first trial, a new jury in Clay County heard the case. Once again, they had to decide, should Roy Lee Ward die for what he did to Stacy Payne? And once again, the answer was yes. For the second time, Roy Lee Ward was sentenced to death. This time, the sentence would stick. The legal process had been followed correctly. The appeals courts would uphold the decision. Roy Lee Ward would spend the rest of his life on death row, waiting for an appointment with death that would come more than 2 decades later. But between 2007 and 2025, a lot would happen. Ward would file appeals. He would challenge his sentence. He would look for any legal avenue to avoid execution. And all the while, Stacy Payne's family would wait for justice to finally be served. The American justice system is slow, especially in death penalty cases. And for good reason. When the punishment is death, we want to be absolutely certain we're executing the right person. We want to be sure every legal protection was provided. We want to know that justice, not vengeance, is being served. For Roy Lee Ward, this meant 24 years on death row. 24 years in a small cell. 24 years knowing that someday, the state of Indiana would end his life. 24 years to think about what he had done. But what is life actually like on death row? What does it mean to spend nearly a quarter century waiting to die? Death row isn't like general population in prison. It's a different world entirely. Isolated. Controlled. A place where time moves differently. Roy Lee Ward spent 24 years in this environment. That's longer than Stacy Payne lived. Longer than some people's entire careers. Long enough for a child to be born, grow up, and graduate from college. On death row, inmates typically spend 23 hours a day in their cells. 1 hour for recreation, usually alone in a small outdoor cage. No contact with other inmates. No programs. No rehabilitation efforts. Because there's no point in rehabilitating someone you plan to execute. Meals are delivered to the cell. Communication with the outside world is extremely limited. Visits are rare and conducted through glass barriers. Every aspect of life is controlled, monitored, and restricted. For 24 years, this was Ward's reality. During this time, the world outside changed dramatically. When Ward first arrived on death row in 2002, the internet was still young. Social media didn't exist. Smartphones hadn't been invented yet. By 2025, the world was almost unrecognizable from the one he'd left behind. But for death row inmates, the world stops on the day they arrive. Time freezes. Life becomes an endless wait. Ward filed multiple appeals during his time on death row. This is standard in capital cases. His lawyers argued various legal points, challenged procedures, looked for any reason the death sentence should be overturned. Every appeal was denied. The appeals process in death penalty cases is designed to be thorough. Multiple levels of review. State courts. Federal courts. Years of legal arguments. This is why executions often happen decades after the crime. The system wants to be absolutely certain before taking a life. But eventually, the appeals run out. Eventually, the execution date gets set. And when that happens, death row inmates face a choice: keep fighting until the very end, or accept what's coming and try to make peace with it. Roy Lee Ward made a surprising decision. In his final months, he dropped his remaining legal challenges. He effectively gave up the fight to stay alive. This doesn't happen often. Most death row inmates fight until the very last minute, filing emergency appeals even as they're being prepared for execution. But Ward stopped fighting. Maybe after 24 years, he was tired. Maybe he felt guilty about what he'd done to Stacy Payne. Maybe he just wanted it to be over. We may never know his true reasons. What we do know is that in 2025, Indiana set an execution date, October 10th. And Roy Lee Ward didn't challenge it.
As the date approached, Roy Lee Ward was moved to a special cell near the execution chamber, where death row inmates spend their final days, receive last visits, choose their last meal, and prepare to die. Ward had to answer questions most of us never face. What do you want for your last meal? Who do you want to see? Any last words? His choice was simple: a hamburger from Texas Corral, a local restaurant chain. Not steak and lobster. Not an elaborate feast. Just a hamburger from a place he remembered from life before death row. There's something humanizing about that. Despite the monster he became the night he killed Stacy Payne, in his final hours he craved something simple and familiar. A reminder that even people who commit terrible crimes are still human beings facing death. But Ward's execution faced scrutiny. Earlier in 2025, Indiana had carried out a botched execution where the inmate appeared to suffer. Questions swirled about the state's protocols. Opponents argued executing Ward under questionable procedures was wrong. Indiana proceeded anyway. 12:01 a.m., October 10th, 2025. Ward was led into the execution chamber, a small, clinical room with a gurney in the center. Witnesses waited behind glass, Stacy's family on one side, media on the other. He was strapped down, IVs inserted. The drugs began flowing. If everything went according to plan, he'd lose consciousness within seconds, stop breathing shortly after, his heart stopping within minutes. At 12:33 a.m., 32 minutes after it began, Roy Lee Ward was pronounced dead. 32 minutes is longer than most executions. The extended timeline raises questions, though Indiana officials never commented publicly. After 24 years on death row, the man who raped and murdered 15-year-old Stacy Payne was gone. But was this justice? Or state-sanctioned killing? That's the question Americans continue to debate. Supporters say some crimes demand the ultimate penalty. Opponents argue the system is flawed, expensive, and risks executing innocent people. Where do you stand? Should Ward have been executed? Or imprisoned for life? What we all agree on: Stacy Payne should still be alive. She should be 39 now, living her dreams. Nothing, not Ward's execution, not life in prison, can bring her back. If you found this story compelling, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with your thoughts. Do you support the death penalty? Was justice served? Every story has an ending, but the truth deserves the last word.